All right, this is Libertarian Overwatch. We are doing our weekly intel drop, kind of talking about our three biggest stories for the week. This is going to be coming out on March 20th. And as usual, there is a lot of news going on, especially on the war front, with Qatar getting bombed yesterday, with just a whole lot of craziness in the Middle East and things like that. Um, so in my opinion, this is one of the bigger stories to come out of the past few days, and this is that the top U.S. counterterrorism official resigned over the war with Iran. So, as we can see here, this is Joe Kent along with Tulsi Gabbard. And so, Joe Kent, a few days ago, ended up resigning from his position. And here we go. This is, I think, the key point here. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. Um, and so he ended up resigning over this. And he did sit down for a multi-hour interview with Tucker Carlson on Wednesday. He also just did an interview with Scott Horton um, a few hours ago. But kind of going into this, for those who may not be familiar with Joe Kent, as we can see here, he did lose his wife in January of 2019 in a bombing in Syria. Um, just horrible, horrible stuff. And to go into it a little bit here, you can see that this is around the time that Trump said he was going to withdraw the troops from Syria, but ultimately did it. And so, kind of going into the story there, some of the generals and things like that said we were withdrawing, and I believe it happened on three separate occasions, and still the troops remain in Syria. But we've also seen recent testimony with Tulsi Gabbard and things like that, where we're just getting all sorts of contradictory information from different voices and things like that right now. And even just maybe like a few hours ago, we even see this that the FBI is conducting a leak investigation into Joe Kent. And this seems to be maybe this is the case of just kind of covering up the things he said. Um, we don't really know too much at this time about this, but as you can see here, some of the things that they talk about regarding Mr. Kent and things like that. As we can see here, that Trump had strong and compelling evidence that Iran was going to attack the United States first. So, yeah, we'll see where all of this goes. But yeah, I definitely think this is a very large story, and I would just urge you to check out the interviews that Joe Kent has to see what he has to say about it all. So, especially for someone who was inside of the administration and things like that. So, all right, let's move on to our next one here, and this one is another doozy. Report: the U.S. presses Syria to invade Lebanon to fight Hezbollah. So, I recently did the Lebanon Cedar Revolution for 2005 a couple of weeks ago here. And basically, what I discovered through that was this conflict is still very much going on. Kind of this proxy war between Hezbollah and Syria and Lebanon and Israel. Um, it's all very much still going on, and especially with this new war, as you can see here, it doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. So this comes from a Reuters report that they were trying to drag Syria into the conflict as well. Like I said, especially if you've read my Cedar Revolution article, you can see how Syrian troops being in Lebanon was a very big deal and things like that, and how they had to continuously draw back the amount of troops present in Syria at the time. Um, but as you can see here, we have Al Jalani. For those who may not be familiar, he was fighting against U.S. forces in Iraq in the mid 2000s, and now he's in the White House getting perfume on him and things like that. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Tom Barrack, also, as we can see here, who's shaking hands with Jelani, following antiwar.com and especially Jason Ditz's work, the amount of comments that Barack has had, and it's gone kind of back and forth where, man, it's just hard to kind of keep up with some of the contradictory reports that we have and things like that. Um, as you can see here, he came out and said that this report was false and inaccurate, and that the U.S. is not trying to convince Syria to invade Lebanon. This also is reminding me of the whole topic of the Kurds, where there was the Axios report about it, and Ryan Grimm and Jeremy Scahill talked about this on their live stream this past Tuesday, and essentially the Axios report was saying like, oh, we see the Kurds. The Kurds are here. The Kurds are around the border, and it turns out that may not have been the case. So, kind of like that, we're gonna want to keep up to date with the story to see if this does end up going anywhere. But as of right now, this is just kind of a report from Reuters. We'll see kind of what becomes of it. But I did think this is a very interesting one, and I think one that also kind of just went under the radar with everything else going on. I mean, I feel like most people were aware of the Joe Kent story, but I feel like this story was just kind of pushed aside. We didn't really see too much out of the story, so. And for our last one, we have from MacKinnon over here, which I've already recommended his stuff before, and I will continue to recommend it. Mark MacKinnon's The New Cold War is such an excellent book about regime changes, especially in Ukraine in 2004 and in Georgia in 2003. Just really great on the ground reporting and things like that. And he's still just killing it. He's still doing a really great job. In fact, this past week, I just liked his work so much, I decided to become a subscriber to the Globe and Mail. But I did find this article interesting. So this came out a couple of days ago, and it kind of just shows right there. The title kind of says it all, and kind of goes to a little bit of the hypocrisy of what's been going on with everything in the world today. But as you can see right there, it says the war in the Middle East already has one big winner, Russia. So essentially, our thesis here is that the person who's been benefiting the most from this is in fact Russia. And in fact, let's go down a little bit further here. As you can see here, there are many, many reasons why people in Moscow are happy. And he says that just the fact that these oil prices are just going through the roof, which, believe me, I can attest to this. I think 2.5 or so weeks ago, before this war started, so before the last or second last day in February, gas prices where I'm at were around maybe 279, 289. Tonight they were 389. And I mean, that's just me for the average guy. I know for like truckers and things like that, I'm just imagining how much that's impacting things. Yeah, it's really terrible stuff to think about. But as you can see a little bit further, I think this part's pretty interesting too, where it's saying that Putin was like very upset about the U.S. attack on Israel, or excuse me, the U.S. attack on Iran. But as we started to see what the closure of the Strait of Hormuz was doing, Moscow was able to see, oh, we can make some money off of this. And in fact, as we can see here, I think this is the kind of data point I was looking for. But as we can see, 150 million per day for Moscow from these oil prices and things like that. So, and just the funniest thing about it all, and let me see if I can find it on here. Yes, I guess I messed it up earlier. But on top of it, we're also calling for like a reduction of those sanctions, which, like I said, just kind of goes to the hypocrisy where there are all these sanctions levied against Russia, but then when things aren't going so well somewhere else, it's time to remove those sanctions. So, kind of where the moral line goes becomes a little bit gray after a while here. But as I said before, I do want to really point out Mark MacKinnon's work. Really great stuff. Let's see if he's got anything new recently. Past that part. Oh, look at that. He's got an article from yesterday. But, I mean, he's super, super great stuff. A Canadian author. Yeah, it looks like covering a lot about Lebanon. We've also been covering stuff about what's going on in Canada, the Ukraine-Russia war. He's been really great on. And there's videos of him too being like right on the front line and things like that. I do want to check out this book right here. I mean, I love the new Cold War so much. I gotta check out the China Diaries and see what I got from there. But you know what? I'm gonna click on this article. I'm gonna save this for me for later because, well, I want to see what he's got to say. So that has been our third video version of the weekly Intel Drop. Tell me if you've been liking this kind of new format. This is something I can kind of do just off the cuff, kind of talk about some things that I think are important. You can just throw it on the background as you're playing your favorite video game, as you're cutting the grass, as you're driving to work, whatever you're doing. But we'll kind of continue with this format. We'll continue to check out what new stories we have coming through, and we'll kind of take it from there. So if you enjoyed this, please like, share, subscribe, and we'll keep coming out with new ones. Have a great day.